One part of YouTube that I really enjoy is A Song of Ice and Fire theorizing YouTube. I've always wanted to contribute to it, but unfortunately, I'm a little late to the game. The last book in the main series came out over a decade ago, and, there's not much hope that the next one is coming out. So pretty much every theory that could possibly happen has already happened. For example, Joffrey got poisoned at his own wedding, and it is pretty obvious who poisoned him. I mean, Littlefinger outright confesses to it, and yet there are a bunch of different theories about who really poisoned Joffrey. I mean, to be fair, they're not true, but who says a theory has to be true in order for it to be a good time to watch? However, I have found a different poisoning that most people don't care to talk about, because it probably didn't even happen. Tywin Lannister's death involves two weird details. The first is that he's on the privy when it happens. The second is after his death, his corpse shows signs of early rot, including a smell so unbearable it is all anybody thinks about during and after the funeral. One of the most devout, a council of septons, who has attending important funerals as part of their duties, had to be helped away after becoming faint. So this is not just the normal way in which corpses stink. The fact that he's on a privy is part of the demystification of Tywin in the eyes of Tyrion. Tywin is such an imposing figure that people think of him more as a god than a man. But when Tywin sneaks into his chambers, he sees not only does he have the same vices as other men, he also, shits like any other person. His corpse is a metaphor for Tywin's rotten legacy, for how all the respect and loyalty he had was tied to fear, not true loyalty. And as soon as his body is cold and he can't hurt people anymore, his lessers only see a disgusting old man who they don't mourn. Now that's what we call a Doylist answer, the reason for something to be included in a story. But what is our Watsonian answer, the reason within the text that it happens? This isn't necessarily a big mystery requiring Star Wars level plot hole explanation. Sometimes things stink for reasons that aren't explained. Tywin was shot with a crossbow bolt right above the groin, which is certainly a place with all kinds of nasty bacteria, so maybe there is no big reason. However, there's a pretty popular fan theory that I really like, that Tywin's corpse was so foul for the same reason he was in the privy for so long in the first place. He was poisoned. I swear, we're almost done with the gross part of the video, but we do have to talk about, some constipation. Tywin is on the privy for the entire time that Tyrion enters the Tower of the Hand, talks to Shae, and murders her. And after all that, we know that he still didn't even accomplish his task until Tyrion gives him the final laxative, so to speak. This is a pretty weird thing to happen, and poison would explain it. Just a few chapters earlier, Maester Pycelle mentions a poison that shuts down a man's bladder and bowels until he drowns in his own poisons. This would explain both Tywin's constipation and the grossness of his body if those poisons were festering after he dies. So, if Tywin was poisoned, who did it? A lot of theorists only go as far as blaming Oberyn and calling it a day, which is totally fair. If someone did it, it's probably Oberyn. Since this poisoning is not a confirmed event to have happened, it hasn't received the same torrent of insane theorizing that other murders have in the series. So I'm here to fill that void and name every character I think could have poisoned Tywin Lannister. Before we start, I should mention, a lot of theory videos go through a lot of weak contenders and then end with the person who they think really did it. The person who I think really did it is no one, with a strong second place going to Oberyn Martell, probably. I'm going to rank all of my theories, and just keep in mind, we're going to get more insane as time goes on, not less. To establish potential guilt, a common metric in both our world and fictional ones is the combination of means, motive, and opportunity. We'll cover motive and opportunity on a case-by-case basis, but we should talk about the means to poison Tywin. First off, which poison did it? The poison I mentioned earlier is called Widow's Blood, and it is the most likely candidate. However, for sake of completeness, there's another option, the Tears of Lys, a tasteless and odorless poison. It's said to attack the bowels and belly and appear as a death from the sickness of those parts. If Tywin was poisoned, no matter what the poison was, we don't see his death. But given his constipation, he could have been killed with this poison. It would also be a nice literary parallel to a different Hand of the King who was killed by this poison, that being Jon Arryn. Either way, a potential suspect would have to get the poison through one of three means. We know poison crafting, especially for the rare foreign poisons, is difficult and expensive. This means our potential poisoner would have to be rich, a learned master of poisons, or sly enough to steal the poison from somewhere. Grand Maester Pycelle accuses Tyrion of stealing several potions from his chambers, including both potions we mentioned. However, we have only seen Tyrion steal one potion this way. It isn't specified which one, but it's probably whatever he used to poison Cersei to keep her on the can while he was plotting around her in Clash. There is a question of whether Pycelle's accusation is correct. Did Tyrion in fact come back later after arresting Pycelle and steal those other poisons we mentioned? And I think the answer is yes. We don't see it on the page, but Tyrion watched Varys confirm his midnight visit to Pycelle's chambers, paired with things that we know he did do, and he never comments on that being untrue. He also never denies that he stole those poisons. Also, the Strangler, the actual poison that killed Joffrey, is not among the potions that Tyrion is accused of stealing. So if it's a frame job, it's a pretty terrible one. So Tyrion almost definitely stole both the potions that one might need to poison Tywin, but Pycelle got them back by the time that Tywin probably was poisoned. Another thing, remember when I mentioned Pycelle describing what the poison does? He says that in court to hundreds of witnesses, so any potential poisoner could either hear that or have an agent that heard that, and then they could use the poison even if they're not a master poisoner because they know the name and they know what it does. So, with that said, let's look at the candidates. This is the classic theory, so I'm not going to dwell too long on it. There are multiple videos explaining the theory in lots of detail, and I will link 2 of my favorites in the description. Put simply, the means is that Oberyn is a master of poisons who probably has a vast private store, which he easily could have brought to King's Landing with him. The opportunity, at least as I see it, is that they were both judges at Tyrion's trial. They spend a lot of time sitting right next to each other. If Tywin ever got a drink, Oberyn would be in arm's reach to poison it. The motive is pretty obvious. But not as obvious as it may seem. Oberyn doesn't want Tywin dead. I mean, he does, but he also wants him to confess to his part in the death of Elia and her children, and to have his legacy publicly stained by that admission. Tywin dying as he does must be considered a loss in Oberyn's book. However, you could say that Oberyn didn't decide to poison Tywin until after he decided to fight for Tyrion in the trial by combat, and he only did it as a last resort in case he died before getting his justice. After all, Tywin dead is still better than Tywin alive. My biggest issue with the Oberyn theory is that he's not that kind of poisoner. He coats his weapons with poison, like a viper. We haven't seen him poison someone's food or drink. He probably can, but he's not a master at it, which means we shouldn't assume that he's able to just sprinkle some in without anyone noticing in a large crowded room. Assuming he doesn't have any special skills of stealth poisoning, he's actually worse situated than the average person, since he is a known poisoner and people will keep an eye on him. I learned about this theory from John Greenwood, one of my favorite A Song of Ice and Fire theorists. He blames Varys for quite a few things by saying that he's working with Littlefinger and everything that happens in King's Landing was his doing. His explanation, I don't think it's true, but it's a lot of fun, and it will inform my version of the theory, but it's buried in one of his longer videos, so if you want a short version to read without me, I'm including a link in the description to a different version of the theory posted on Reddit. The means would be pretty easy. With Varys' resources, it's not a stretch to imagine he has access to a supply of poison. And if he doesn't, he could just sneak into Pycelle's chambers and steal them using his secret passageways. Using those same passageways, he could have snuck into Tywin's chambers and poisoned something that he was drinking. He also could have used a cat's paw, such as Shae, but we're going to cover her in a separate theory because there's a lot to talk about there. The motive is complicated and different depending on what exactly you think Varys did. All of these theories subscribe to the idea that Varys wanted Tyrion to kill Tywin to sever his ties to the current regime on a personal level and a legal one if Joffrey's true killer was ever unmasked. The main theory is that Varys gave Tywin something that would kill him slowly and keep him on the privy. The goal is not just to kill Tywin, but to make it as easy as possible for Tyrion to kill him. Tywin is less likely to call for help or fight back if he's trapped on the privy and significantly weakened by a poison that's actively killing him. In this version of the theory, if Tyrion loses his nerve and doesn't kill Tywin, Tywin still dies, which is useful for Varys, and Tyrion probably still gets blamed because he was just accused of poisoning and he escaped. There's an alternate theory that says Tywin wasn't fatally poisoned, but Varys slipped in the same stuff that Tyrion gave to Cersei to trap her on the privy to scheme without her. This would have the same effect of ensuring that he's alone and defenseless for Tyrion to find. And this way, if Tyrion loses his nerve, Varys can arrange for Tywin to die a different way a little later, more dramatically. Whatever you subscribe to, I think it's a solid theory. So this is pretty much the same theory as previous, except that Shae was involved. Varys still acquires the means, so we don't have to talk about that. This time, he passes them along to Shae to slip into Tywin's drink or something while they're going at it. Other than being slightly easier of a delivery method, including Shae in the schemes does have a perk or two for Varys. Important to note, Varys did not know that Tyrion was going to kill Shae. When Tyrion tells him, he says, "You knew what she was." This seems more serious to me than the usual Varys, who would usually make a joke at a time like this. I may be reading into this too much, but he seems disapproving, maybe a little surprised. I posit Varys is upset here because he expected Shae to live and planned on using her in later schemes. If you're a Varys stan who thinks your boy can never be wrong about anything, fair, but remember, it's been explicitly stated that Varys doesn't understand Tyrion and Shae's relationship due to his blind spot for how people's judgment is impaired by love and lust. Anyway, assuming Varys expected Shae to survive Tyrion's visit and stay in King's Landing, he may have been grooming her as an agent. He's already trusted her with the knowledge that there are secret passages in the Red Keep, and she's proven herself capable of subterfuge, as evidenced by her successful run disguised as multiple people's handmaids. Before the trial, Varys had Shae on his hook with his knowledge of her trysts with Tyrion, but that's now public knowledge, so if he wants to keep her under his thumb, he would have to get a new lever, and making her complicit in the death of Tywin Lannister would do the trick. Now, moving on to Shae's motivations, it's pretty obvious. Tywin is terrifying. There's a little more to it if you really want to get into it, but I will save that to my other, more Shae-centric theory. If we're looking at a poisoning, the local maester is always a suspect. Pycelle's supply of Tears of Bliss and Widow's Blood were stolen, but he got them back by the time that he would poison Tywin if he wanted to. He also has dozens of other poisons at his disposal and the expertise to use them to look like natural causes. We don't have a great opportunity on the page, but there absolutely could have been a private meeting between Tywin and Pycelle while Tyrion was in jail. They're both non-POV characters after all. And Tywin would not watch his drink around Pycelle because he trusts him. On that note, the most difficult thing about this theory is that Pycelle is incredibly loyal to House Lannister and especially Tywin, so what would cause him to turn on his idol after decades of loyal service? When I came up with Pycelle as a possibility, my answer was the Red Wedding. Tywin finally did something too cruel and evil for even Pycelle to support. But, I don't know, Pycelle was on board to assassinate pregnant Dany to prevent a war, so I imagine he could justify some light war crimes on similar grounds. No, if Pycelle turned on Tywin after decades of loyalty, it would be because of his true loyalty, which is not to Tywin, but House Lannister. Which leads me to a mini-theory within all this. What if Pycelle knew or suspected of Tyrion's innocence? During the trial, Pycelle is describing the poisons Tyrion stole from him, leading to this exchange. "Pycelle," Tyrion called out, risking his father's wrath, "could any of these poisons choke off a man's breath?" "No. For that, you must turn to a rarer poison. When I was a boy at the Citadel, my teachers named it simply the Strangler." "But this rare poison was not found, was it?" "No, my lord." Pycelle blinked at him. "You used it all to kill the noblest child the gods ever put on this good earth." This is, by far, Tyrion's best defense in the entire trial. He may have stolen a bunch of poisons from Pycelle, but the Strangler wasn't one of them. When Tyrion points this out, Pycelle blinks, which is usually meant to signify a character is stopping to think. Pycelle then delivers kind of a non-answer. Yeah, we didn't find the poison because you used all of it. But what he notably doesn't say is that he had a supply of Strangler that was lost and is still unaccounted for. If he did, he should have mentioned that. In fact, he should have stated it before now as the likely murder weapon. As it stands, it seems to me like Pycelle didn't have any of the Strangler in his chambers and didn't realize that it was clearly the murder weapon until Tyrion mentioned it. This means Pycelle should realize that Tyrion couldn't have gotten the Strangler from him, which weakens the case against him by a lot, because where the hell else would Tyrion get such a poison? I could see how this went over most people's heads in the trial, because not everyone has the poison expertise to understand that the Strangler was the only poison that could have killed Joffrey, and that it's so rare there's no other way Tyrion could have found it except stealing it from Pycelle. So if I'm right about this, Pycelle should be starting to doubt Tyrion's guilt, which means that his idol, Tywin, is prosecuting his innocent son despite having the information to know he's not guilty. I could imagine a scene off-page where Pycelle privately shares his concerns with Tywin, and Tywin brushes them off, saying, no, Tyrion's definitely guilty. Shut up, Pycelle. The Lannisters have a reputation for caring about what's best for their family, but Tywin is directly responsible for sentencing his own son to death for a crime he didn't commit, which amounts basically to kinslaying. Even worse, while Pycelle had no love for Tyrion, he seemed to like Joffrey. Remember, he called him the noblest child ever. If Tywin is letting Tyrion take the fall to make a quick end to the trial, he's letting the real killer get away with it. Such disregard for justice concerning his own grandson goes directly against his own values and may have been enough to anger Pycelle. I like Pycelle in a mechanical sense. I think the character arc required to make this happen is too big to happen without any hints on the page, hints that I did not find. So, it probably wasn't him, but maybe. Hello. I am touching grass. It's a little out of frame, but... And I just wanted to pop in to prove that I'm capable of touching grass. I'm not insane. I know what this sounds like. But I think it's important to do this sort of theorizing. And let me explain why. Fan theories are important because the process of theorizing causes you to take a closer look at the work. It basically invites critical analysis. My favorite fan theory ever is that Hagrid from Harry Potter is a Death Eater. And, he's not, but there's so much evidence. And to me, that doesn't prove that Hagrid is evil. It proves that Harry Potter is fundamentally flawed, both in some weird early installment weirdness that doesn't get properly explained, and the fact that Hagrid is just a bad person, and J.K. Rowling wrote a character whose actions ran counter to everything that was good and holy about the series. And, fan theory logic, the drive to try to figure out something, helps expose that kind of stuff in writing. Every single one of these theories has caused me to examine more deeply the character motivations and morals of all of these people. And that's interesting. It's fun. They're not true. The Queen of Thorns is one of the few confirmed poisoners in the main series, assuming Littlefinger told the truth to Sansa about everything that happened. So it's only natural to look to her when a poisoning happens in the city where she is. The motive is fair. While not immediately as with Joffrey, Olenna would certainly benefit from Tywin dying. With the death of the Lannister family patriarch, the power balance would shift to the Tyrells. Furthermore, Tywin previously tried to marry Cersei to Willis Tyrell. May seem open to it, but Olenna shut it down. Tywin has not stopped with his matchmaking by the time he dies. He tells Jaime he plans to offer him to Marjorie instead of Tommen, and that he wants to match Cersei with Oberyn Martell. The Tyrells do not want either of these to happen, and it doesn't take a genius to know that Tywin is the only one who's really pushing for them, and without him, all of this matchmaking goes away. It's funny to think that Olenna poisoned Tywin thinking that Cersei would be a much easier opponent to deal with, which is disastrously wrong for her. So, Olenna has motive, but does she have means and opportunity? The poison she killed Joffrey with was procured by Littlefinger, not her. However, she is the head of a powerful family with her own maester, so it wouldn't be too hard to wrestle up some poison if she was so inclined. Furthermore, Olenna was probably at the trial. She's not mentioned as being there, but not a lot of people are. Tyrion has other things to focus on. And at the very least, she definitely had an agent there feeding her updates. If she had poisons on the mind, she probably heard Pycelle's description of widow's blood and possibly got some ideas. Maybe she even sent a sneaky Tyrell to steal Pycelle's stash. Although again, I feel like it's not a stretch of the imagination to imagine she has her own stash. Either way, the means and motive are covered. As for opportunity, I don't know. Like with Pycelle, neither of them are POV characters, so maybe they could have hung out. But we don't see them eating together, so who knows. You may remember I said there'd be another Shae theory, and this is it. Imagine you're Shae. Your situation, which has already been unsafe and tumultuous, just got so much worse. You have caught the eye of Tywin Lannister, who, like Tyrion, is not a person you can say no to. However, unlike Tyrion, Tywin has a reputation for murdering innocent people. On top of that, Tywin already has cause to hate you, and does not respect prostitutes. Worst part is, Tywin is known for never taking the services of a prostitute. What do you think he's going to do to you when he's done with you? There's only one way to be sure that you won't tell anyone about his hypocrisy. If you try to run away, he'll use his resources to hunt you down, much for the same reasons. Shae, who is portrayed as clever, certainly knows all this, and by her own admission, she's scared of Tywin. Her safest option is to figure out how to get Tywin out of the picture. What would I do if I was Shae? I'd poison that guy. And I know exactly where to get the poison. Seducing Pycelle. We know that Pycelle has a thing for attractive women. So Shae could either sleep with him or just distract him long enough to steal the poisons. Now Shae was not at the trial and probably wasn't close enough to hear Pycelle talking about the poison. Although she could have been just out of sight. We don't know. If Shae doesn't know which poison to use, she's already stealing from Pycelle through social engineering, so she could just get him talking about the poisons until he gets to one that sounds like natural causes. So Tywin wasn't poisoned is kind of a dud theory, but it is probably true, so we're going to go A tier. Oberyn poisoned Tywin, easy S tier. I mean, he did do it. Varys, I'm going also S tier, but below Oberyn. This, by the way, is either he did it himself or he used Shae as his agent. I think it's very interesting, but not quite as good as Oberyn. Pycelle, I'm gonna do C tier. You know, it just requires a lot of stuff to happen off screen, and there's no hints about it at all. So, but it is possible. It's reasonable to think that he might have done it. Olenna, let's go B tier. You know, it's interesting. It's a nice idea, but it's not true. So there's only so high you can go. Shae, there is an issue of if she did poison Tywin, and this is also true as if she was working for Varys, why didn't she tell Tyrion that? Like, Tyrion's gonna kill her, and she doesn't say, hey, by the way, I murdered your father. He's actively on the shitter right now because I poisoned him fatally. Like, if she's worried about Tyrion killing her, I feel like that's a no-brainer to say that if it's the truth. So for that reason, I'm going to go B tier below Olenna. So yeah, that's my ranking. The ones that I didn't come up with are S tier. The wind is picking up a little. Hopefully you can hear me. I don't have my microphone out here, so we're just throwing caution to the wind, so to speak. Yeah, this is why professional YouTubers don't film outside.